You are listening to the Buried Treasures podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe down below. Like, comment, and share your favorite episode with your friends and family members. And please help us establish and build a masjid in Lombard, Illinois. You can go to supportmu.org to make a contribution. Jazakumullahu khairan. Welcome to the Buried Treasures podcast, brought to you by Masjid Al-Rahman, where I interview a new guest every week to discover their journey. I'm Hamza Warsi. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakumullahu khairan, everyone, for joining us. We have the only, mashallah, the guy who left Chicago and is very happy in Dallas now, Mufti Hussain Kamani. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum wa
Assalamu
rahmatullah.
alaikum. How is Dallas?
It's great.
It's great.
It's good.
I've noticed you've been using the word y'all a lot more now in conversation.
It's the return of the Kentucky y'all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Full circle then.
Full circle.
Full circle.
Yeah.
MashaAllah. So, Mufti, tell us about, speaking of Kentucky, where were you born and raised and what were you up to in your early days?
Well, I was born in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. My parents actually met and were married in Chicago.
MashaAllah.
And this is where all of my siblings were born. However, they ended up moving to Kentucky due to a business venture.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing is, out of all the places they moved to Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And that's where I was born.
MashaAllah.
And the reason why that's interesting is because Elizabethtown, Kentucky, later on becomes a very strong Muslim community.
MashaAllah.
Even some of the more bigger communities weren't able to have the level of leadership and growth and brotherhood and sisterhood, just in the community that our community had. So that's where I was born, and that's where I grew up. When I say grew up, it's interesting because when people think grow up, they think that you're there all the time and you spent your childhood there.
Mm-hmm.
But in my case, and my brother's case, Sheikh Mubin, I would say that we grew up and spent the prime years of our life in madrasas.
Mm.
But we'd go back to Kentucky for Ramadan break or go there for the Eid break. But the actual years of our life, those prime years, we spent them in madrasas across the world studying.
You mentioned your parents, that they met in Chicago. Can you speak to us a little bit about them?
My mother was a Hindu revert to Islam. My father, he was an immigrant from Pakistan. He came to America, and due to certain U.S. immigration laws, there was a wave of folks from Asia that came in under educational visas.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a beneficiary of that too.
MashaAllah.
In addition to his studies, he spent a lot of his time just driving a cab and working so he can send some money back home, because the situation back home wasn't too good. Our family wasn't affluent. So my father, he spent most of his time working, and it was that hustle grind. I was talking to someone last night, and I was explaining to them that the interesting thing about our lives is that if we don't create time for the deen, and if we don't really go out of our way and really, make it happen,
mm-hmm.
the dunya and the way it's functioned, the way it's created, is that it'll always suck you in like a vacuum. Then all you can do is look from inside the vacuum outwards and think of how great it could have been while you know that you're far from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cycle is so intense. And I was telling this friend of mine last night, then the only opportunity left is to aspire those spiritual experiences through your children, because you realize it's no longer within your own reach. Not that it's not possible,
mm-hmm.
but reality dictates otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And that, what I just said, was probably what my father went through. That reality dictated for him that it wasn't in his capacity to study the deen or to become a hafid or to learn the religion. And for him, the only way to achieve that was through his children. He would look at ulama, he loved them a lot. He saw what they did. He heard their speeches and really inspired by them. Really. there were so many days in our life as children that we saw that our father would leave us and go to another city just because there was someone who needed to go there. When I say someone, I mean like there was a sheikh's visiting our town, and then he says, "Oh, I need to go to Cincinnati," and my father said, "Okay, I'll drive you there."
MashaAllah.
Because in those days, not everyone had cars, and it wasn't that easy. So he would drive people out and bring them back. The khidmah of the ulama for him was a very big thing, but he wanted us to study the deen. And that's when I remember us being young, and he pitched it to my mother that I would like for the kids to study the deen. And for my mother as a convert, it was very interesting because she always felt that she hadn't done enough to be a Muslim. When she looked at other Muslims around her, she saw that these people were Muslim from birth. They had so many good deeds already piled up in their book of deeds because of the privilege that they were born Muslims. And for her, she accepted Islam later on. So she always felt that she was behind.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the opportunity presented itself that, maybe the kids should go and study, my dad thought about it. He was really excited about it. For my mom, she was okay with it on the premise that this would be what would help her level the playing field, if you wish to say. That it would be her way of saying to Allah that I wasn't able to live out such a glorious scholarly life of the deen, but I want my children to do it. And it's interesting because what I learned from this is that sometimes a person isn't able to accomplish something themselves, but the sorrow and guilt of not being able to accomplish that thing then creates a drive in you to want to see that thing happen before your eyes. And even if it's not through you, it's through another means.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's that second generation of people who actually end up doing sometimes the big thing.
Sure.
Or in our case, not necessarily a big thing. I mean, we're not doing anything special. But in some cases in history, I'm just running through some ideas in my mind, some stories in my mind, where you see that actual change happening. Wallahu alam.
MashaAllah.
I'm thinking of, actually, I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of right now, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah ta'ala, famous Syrian scholar. His father was not a scholar.
SubhanAllah.
His father, he was a businessman who loved ulama. And Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah ta'ala says that it was the love that my father had for ulama that inspired me to become an alim of the deen, or to become a talib al-ilm of the deen, a scholar of the deen. Someone who was loved by all. Whether it was in the Arab land or within the Muslim community. Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah ta'ala was very dear to even the ulama of the subcontinent. And you look at all of this, and it's an inspiration of what? A father who had a dream, who encouraged his son.
How was that conversation, or do you recall, because you left to madrasa around what time?
It was around 93.
So you're fairly young.
Yes.
At this time. So what I'm trying to ask is, how was that conversation with you and your parents when they're telling you that, hey, we want you to go memorize the Qur'an?
There was no conversation.
Okay.
Not one that I recall anyway. And I say that because as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old child, your trust in your parents is so great that when they guide you to something, you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Most children who go into hifz programs, there really isn't a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's an encouragement. It's an opportunity. The child does it. I have children that are memorizing the Qur'an right now.
MashaAllah.
And I've noticed that there are 3 sort of windows of children memorizing the Qur'an. There's the window which is before the child reaches 10 years of age. Then the second window is between 10 and 14. And the third window is after 14. If the child starts their Qur'an before the age of 10, it's easiest to get them started because there really isn't much of a conversation. It's just a parent telling their child that we'd like for you to memorize the Qur'an, and the child will most likely, with some basic tarbiyah, say sure.
Mm-hmm.
As long as that child finishes before they turn 14, the whole experience, no matter how difficult it is, will be water under the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point in their life, they've only gone through so much development. The downside is that you have a young person who's memorized the Quran. Now you have another task, which is to get them to appreciate the Quran they memorized.
Yeah.
Or to engage them in the interim until they don't finish off high school so they don't drift away from the deen.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you find parents who put their children into alim schools right away. It's not appropriate. It shouldn't happen. Students should not be taken into advanced Islamic studies at the age of 13, 14. It's not a good idea. Now, the second option is that the child starts memorizing the Quran after the age of 10. If they start after the age of 10, then you need input from the child. But it's still minimal, with a little bit of tarbiyah. Now, the problem is that if they don't finish before 14, if they finish before 14, water under the bridge. It won't affect them as much. They've memorized the Quran, that's it. When I say it won't affect them, I'm not talking about the spiritual effect. I'm talking about the emotional effect. Because memorizing the Quran is a tremendous task, and it has a profound imprint on the human being, which could be seen from one perspective. A therapist may also describe it as trauma. Not all trauma is bad, but it could be a type of trauma. And this isn't only because the environment in which the Quran is memorized could be hostile. Mm-hmm. That's not what it is. It's actually also a result of the task at hand itself. Inna sanulqi alayka qawlan thaqila. Memorizing the Quran is not an easy thing. It's hard. It breaks you in the process. Mm-hmm. There are nights of tears. There are days with hopelessness. So at post 14, when children graduate, it's common for them to ask, what was the point of that? In particular, if their Quran memorization journey was very shallow, where there was no spiritual stimulation at all. So they'll say, what was the point of that? At times they can turn to their parents and they can say that, you robbed me of my childhood. It's a very common statement. Or they feel that they missed out, air quotes, on life. That's a dangerous place right there. That one right there. And because they didn't actively opt in, they're not okay with the trauma that goes with it. Right? The third group of people are those who start their Quran memorization post 14. They're the hardest ones to convince to do. But if they are willing to do it, there's nothing in the world that'll stop them. If they turn 50 years old, they'll complete it. But at that point, when they choose to do it, it's their decision. So no matter what the trauma is, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how easy it is, this has been my observation. That they'll walk it till the end. So I was from that first group where my parents asked me when I was young to memorize the Quran, and it was an easy thing. And alhamdulillah, I finished by the time I was 9, 10.
MashaAllah. So where did you go to school and who were your teachers?
So when it came to us studying in madrasa, my father wasn't too well connected on the Islamic scene. There wasn't really much of an Islamic scene in the early 90s, late 80s, but whatever it was, he didn't know that much about it. So it was a matter of my father asking people, where should I send my kids to study? And I was at the mercy of that dude who was going to give some random advice to my dad that I hope he said the right thing. So it's kind of like someone spin the globe and just poke the finger and say, right there. That's where you're sending him. Yeah, so it was like a Russian roulette. I studied first in India. I studied first in Pakistan with Mufti Naeem Sahab in Binoria. It didn't work out for us. The environment, the weather, the whole culture was too much of a shock. Then we tried India after that. That was also very difficult. It was very difficult. That didn't work out for us either. We ended up going to Al-Madaniyah in Buffalo. And I had a teacher by the name of Sheikh Abdul Samad Mamoon. You've met him, right?
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah. He used to teach Hifz in Jackson Heights. A few years back, I met him there. And he was my Hifz teacher. He was the Sheikh that when I joined his class, I had memorized 7 juz of the Quran, 7 ajza. and he had me start again.
MashaAllah.
And then I started again with him. He was a very strict teacher, very particular on discipline. But I also feel he was very compassionate.
MashaAllah.
At least to me, he was. He was very kind, very loving. There were days where I would be reading the Qur'an. Like if it was the last 10 minutes on Saturday before we went on our weekend break,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be reading Qur'an right before lunch, like at 12 o'clock-ish. I'd be reading to him, and he would have the whole class quiet down, and I would read an ayah of the Qur'an. I remember this happened once, particularly with Surah Al-Rahman. And I said, I read Ar-Rahman, and then he made a dua for me, and everyone said, Ameen.
No.
Then I read another ayah. This is, by the way, when I was under 10 years old. I was young. And I read another ayah, and then he made another dua, and he said, Ameen. And I kept reading, and he kept making dua, and he kept making dua. And I never understood until today what motivated him, what made him give those duas to me. I wasn't worthy of it. I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I had something special to offer. One of the duas that he made that day, he said, May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in Urdu he said, Allah ta'ala tumhe mufti banaye. And everyone said, Ameen. And Allah is my witness, that day I thought to myself, okay, that's not happening. I was like, retrospectively, it's laughable, because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proves you wrong, that's all you can do. Laugh at yourself for even doubting. But as a child, it was so ba'eed, so far-fetched. I couldn't memorize the Qur'an. I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, many of the ulama who share their stories of memorizing the Qur'an and learning Islam, I feel like their stories are that they were straight A students. That wasn't my story.
Mm-hmm.
I was the son of a convert who didn't know much about Islam. And but he made that dua. May Allah reward him, Sheikh. I met him actually a few weeks ago. I was with the kids, and we had just finished the Qalam fundraising tour. Last stop was in Jersey. And then after that, Sheikh Abdul Nasser came back to Dallas. I hung out, and then my wife and children, they were there too. And so we were driving from Jersey to DC. The kids wanted to just, see the places that they read about in history. So on the way there, Maulana Abdul Samad lives there actually.
In DC now?
No, he doesn't live in DC. He lives at the border of Philly and Jersey.
Okay, mashallah.
So we went over to his place. Man, he was so happy.
Mashallah.
He was happy. His wife was there. She used to, I remember her too from childhood. His sons were there. His daughter was there. It was just a beautiful experience to be able to connect with him again. My children were there too. So then I said to my kids that I'd like for you guys to read Al-Qur'an to the same sheikh I used to read Al-Qur'an to.
Mashallah. Mashallah.
And probably the greatest badge of honor in my life was that moment at the end when my kids finished reading. He said, Inki tajweed achhi hai.
Mashallah.
Which in our language means their recitation is good.
Mashallah.
And I was like, oh, whoa. And I turned to them and I was like, you know how many times I got beat up because my tajweed wasn't good? This same guy, the same chef told me 1,000,000 times that my tajweed sucked.
Yeah.
And here's telling you guys. But it was really awesome. Alhamdulillah. What a blessing from Allah. Sheikh Abdul Samad was a gift.
Mashallah, mashallah. When you first got to Darul Madaniyah, you were now living on campus. What were some of the struggles being a 7-year-old in a boarding madrasa and living on campus away from family?
I had never studied Islam while not being a boarding student. Never.
Mm-hmm.
That never happened, not one day of my life.
Yeah.
So whether I was back home, India, Pakistan, or whether it was in England, whether it was in Buffalo, I had grown accustomed to this. So being in Buffalo, I was already seasoned. There was no new experience here. If anything, it was a luxury resort, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
And the reason was because in India and Pakistan, where I had studied, the accommodations were very poor. When I say poor, I wouldn't necessarily blame the organizations or institutions. I'm comparing it from my perspective to my bedroom in E-Town, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no Pakistan, India madrasa that's going to have the king-size bed that I had at home with a comforter and nice thread count sheets and 10 pillows on my bed, you know? In those madrasas, we used to sleep on quilts, which were thick, so they were like mattresses. In the morning, you would wake up and tie a rope around it and put it on the rack on top, and at nighttime, you would open it up, and that was your bed. When I came to Buffalo, just the housing experience was different because they had beds there, like actual beds.
Mm-hmm.
For us, that was a big thing. When I had studied in India and Pakistan was somewhat better because they had a little bit of an upgraded section. Mufti Naeem Sahib was very, rahimahullah, was conscious of ensuring that students who came from abroad were provided more amenities during their stay because they were accustomed to them. In India, where I studied, it wasn't like that. So the challenges that I faced while I was in India, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really put us through some tough days. Those days were, they were very difficult. When I came back to America, I remember my mom and dad and my sister, they picked us up from the airport and they asked us, so how was India? And my brother and I looked at each other, and with our eyes, we had communicated in that moment that the best course at this point was to not ever tell them how it was, because it was too difficult. They acted upon someone else's advice, and had they known how difficult it was out there, they wouldn't have done it. So when I came to America, I know I kept it very vague about the whole India experience, and it's because it's a tough conversation to have. But what I will tell you is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested us because when we joined the madrasa, our caretakers who lived in Mumbai at the time, 6 hours away on train, they had said to the madrasa that they wanted us to have the full experience of being students. So as a result of that, we were given no special stipend. So we were treated like the average village kid in the community, in the madrasa.
Yeah.
And many of these madrasas, if you've seen them before, they are akin to being orphanages. Very poor children, and it's very difficult. So you would buy toothpaste from the local village, and as soon as you purchase one tube, you would get 5 rupees a week. You'd have to start saving for the next tube right away. So the luxury of buying candies or drinks or other things, that was unimaginable. If you lost your slippers, you had to choose between whether you were going to save to buy slippers or whether you were going to buy another tube of toothpaste. So those were very difficult days. There was no such thing as a washing machine or dryer. We used to carry our clothes to the village that was nearby, and there was a pond there, and all the villagers would gather, and the students would be there too, and they would wash their clothes in the pond. You would take a stick and beat the dirt out of it, literally. And then you'd dry it up, wring it out, put it back on your shoulder, and carry the clothes back to madrasa. These are things that we did when we were 7, 8 years old. Walking miles like this. So those were, and now when I came to Buffalo, they had a washing machine there. Are you kidding me? They had an indoor basketball court.
Yeah,
the Buffalo madrasa was amazing. It had a juvenile feel. I'll tell you that. I think it's because they literally purchased a juvenile and turned it into a madrasa.
Yeah.
So that had a interesting sort of mixed feeling vibe. They had a lot of cameras in places. It was very supervised. It's not because the teacher, at least in my perspective, it's not because they were trying to invade the students' privacy as much as it was providing safety for the students, because the part of town where they had the madrasa wasn't the safest area. This is my interpretation. Wallahu alam, Allah knows best after that. Okay. But it was, we had air-conditioned rooms. I don't know what air-conditioning was. I had unimaginable in India and Pakistan. So there was air conditioned there. We had, everyone spoke English.
MashaAllah.
That was amazing.
MashaAllah.
I hadn't communicated with people in India properly in years because I didn't know Urdu that well.
Mhm.
I could speak it when I was there. I picked up more than I knew on day one, but it was very limited. But Buffalo was so much more comfortable. It was a blessing from Allah.
MashaAllah. Mufti Saab, you mentioned your brother Maulana Mubin, Sheikh Mubin, a few times now. So throughout your journey of studying and memorizing, is your brother with you?
So I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. Sheikh Mubin and I are the youngest. He's 3 years older than I am. He started studying the deen before I did. His first stop was actually in Chicago. He had studied alongside with Dr. Omar Hussaini when they had all started memorizing the Quran. But we studied together in Pakistan. In India, we were together. In Buffalo, we were together as well. However, there was a point in Buffalo where he had to head back home to Kentucky. He went back home. It's like a 1-2 year gap. There was a period. When we went to England, we were back together, and then we stayed together till the end. I took the longer route in the Alamiya program, so I hung around. I was stuck around in England for a few extra years, but he took the more immediate direct route in the Alamiya program. They had different options, and therefore he finished a little before I did.
Okay, mashallah. And so going back to your hifz and your memorization, was there ever a point in your memorization where you wanted to stop? Was it ever too much?
Every day. Every day was too much. Every day I wanted to stop. Every day was going into the battlefield and knowing that if I didn't give it my best, it wouldn't happen. And it was because I didn't have the talent of memorizing the Quran. My memory was nothing special or sharp. Growing up in Kentucky, one of the downsides were that I never learned Arabic. Alif, ba, ta, my Arabi just reading was poor. My tajweed, there was no such thing as tajweed. It was really bad. So, and I think that's one of the downsides. I wish I had, if I were to do it again, I would have delayed my Quran memorizing for a few years and focused more on becoming more fluent in the reading of the Arabic language, creating a familiarity. I think that set me back significantly. But yeah, every day was like that.
So what got you over the struggles?
There was never another option. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You started something, you finished it.
Okay.
You don't chicken out, you don't leave halfway through. That was our upbringing and everything.
Inshallah.
If you're going to start Alim program, you don't have to start it, but if you're going to start it, then
you got to finish it.
You're finishing it. Then you don't have to start, but if you're starting, then you finish it. The same with that's been my mentality in everything I do. You know, when I was imam in Chicago, I was only imam in one masjid. There were no 2 masjids.
Yeah,
one masjid. That's it.
Yeah.
You start, you stay. Even in Dallas, the community I serve in, 5 years, same masjid.
Mashallah.
You don't move. You start somewhere, you finish it. So there's no, I should go here, I should go there, another opportunity here, another opportunity there. Oh, I heard there's another sheikh here, or maybe I can do it later on. None of that. You do all of those considerations before you start. But once you've started, فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ.
Mashallah.
And if I'm honest, that's what it was. There was no other option. It was only one option, which is you finished it. The second thing was, I saw my mother really wanting this from us. For her, it would have meant the world if we had memorized the Quran. When she accepted Islam, her family disowned her. Everyone. And it never changed. That was it. For her entire life. Until the day she died. Rahimahullah. It was the same. So she always wondered where the silver lining was. And she felt the silver lining was that one day her children would memorize the Quran. And for her, that was the ultimate accomplishment. Like, my son has memorized the Quran cover to cover. For those of us that are already in these religious circles, that seems to be a small accomplishment. But for someone who is somewhat new to the deen, that's an unimaginable feat.
Sure.
So I saw it in her. My teacher had told, Sheikh Abdul Samad had told my mother on multiple occasions that your son's not fit to memorize the Quran. You should take him home. He wasn't being mean, by the way. He was being honest. My mother, rahimahullah, used to always cry and beg him. No, keep him, keep him. There was one time my mother came to drop me off to the madrasa. We had just finished praying, if I recall correctly, Isha Salah. And there were the masjid, I believe was called Masjid Zakaria. We had just stepped out of the masjid. There was a staircase outside the masjid. And we were walking down the staircase. I was very young. And my mother was there, so she saw my Sheikh Abdul Samad, and she pulled him aside. They were having a private conversation. I overheard it. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I heard it. And in there, Sheikh Abdul Samad said to my mother that I know you're here to drop your son off, but you should take him back. There are other things that he can do in his life. Memorizing Quran is not his thing. She broke out into tears. This lady. She said, I've only made one dua to Allah that He accepts my children for the deen. If I take him back from here without him becoming Hafiz, my heart will break.
Sure.
She says, I don't have anything to offer to Allah. All I have is my duas. I don't know how to read the Quran. I don't know how to pray salah. I do these things. Only Allah knows if my salah will even be accepted. Sometimes when I used to visit home from madrasa, my mom used to say to me that, Hussain, meri namaz sun. Listen to if I can read my salahs right. So I would listen to her, and God, it was a mess. She was mispronouncing words. It was all over the place, mumble, jumble, everything. So she was crying, and she said to the Shaykh that I really want Allah to accept my duas. I need him to become Hafiz. I overheard that conversation. And that day I realized how much it meant to her that I did this. And I think I could say confidently that is what pushed me over the edge.
Sure.
And Sheikh Abdul Samad, he worked really hard, and basically that was the turning point in my Quran memorization. I also think that Sheikh Abdul Samad used a few different techniques to help me memorize more, which is maybe a discussion for another time.
How was it when you finally saw light at the end of the tunnel?
It was great. It was great. Well, that's what I mean. Sheikh Abdul Samad, he used some techniques. I think what he did was he didn't hold me as accountable as he would for my failures. Therefore, giving me an illusion of accomplishment, and that gave birth to confidence. When a person has confidence, they can do anything.
Yeah.
That was a turning point.
As you're getting closer and closer to the finish line, I think you mentioned it before, someone else was telling me that you would just fall asleep memorizing wherever.
Every night.
SubhanAllah.
Every night.
Wow.
This was a known thing.
Yeah.
I think those who studied with me in the madrasa, they knew that Isha Salah time, I used to start memorizing the Quran every day at 4 a.m. I remember this clearly. In our room, I used to be in room 4. On my bunk bed was my friend Hafiz Jamil Akhunzada, who is the Hifz teacher currently in Al-Madaniyah. I think he's still there. He's from New York, the capital. So in our room, they had this rule that no one was allowed to set alarms until half an hour before Fajr. Because there were 15, 20 guys in the room.
Yeah.
So that was a courtesy. I used to secretly set my alarm for 2 hours before. But I knew that if I didn't turn it off in the first beep, everyone else would wake up. So before the first beep would even happen, I'd slam it shut. Or use my watch sometimes because it had a softer beep. The problem was that there was nowhere to read Quran. Because we were in the boarding.
Yeah.
In the boarding, the ground floor, all the lights were off. I could go to the gym area and read there, but that was creepy because I was a young kid and I'm going to sit in the gym alone. So the ground floor, there were 4 rooms there. Everyone would be sleeping. The hallway lights, I couldn't turn them on because that would disturb people. Reading Quran, the only place that was left was inside the bathroom because lights would be on there. But obviously you can't read the Quran there. So what I used to do is outside the bathroom in the hallway, there was an exit sign. There was an emergency sign that had exit written on it in red.
Mhm.
I took a chair and I used to stand on the chair and use that light to read the Quran.
MashaAllah.
That's how I started doing it.
MashaAllah.
And I used to start early in the morning and read and read and read. By Isha, I would just collapse. Not literally, but
Yeah.
wherever I was done.
Yeah.
So it wasn't uncommon for me to fall asleep in sajda while praying the sunnahs of Isha Salah and then wake up 4 hours later, fallen on the side in my sajda
MashaAllah.
and locked inside the masjid because everyone's gone and no one saw this kid.
Yeah. Oh, MashaAllah.
Yeah, so that was a thing. Yeah, we used to start early and then I wouldn't get any rest during the day. So about Isha time, I would just go to sleep.
How was it reciting your final new lesson, final sabak to Sheikh Abdul Samad?
It was beautiful. It was a victory in accomplishing a goal, in fulfilling my mother's desire, my father's desire, in proving to my sheikh that his hard work meant so much.
MashaAllah.
And it also meant so much because I was now in the team of people who Allah had chosen for the preservation of the Quran.
MashaAllah.
It felt great.
MashaAllah.
Yeah.
MashaAllah.
I hope that one day Allah allows me to see it in my own children.
Ameen. And so where did you finish exactly?
The first juz.
First juz. So
Yeah.
you went backwards from
All the way.
30th all the way, mashallah. And were your parents there or did you...
They all came.
Oh, they all came, mashallah.
Yeah.
Mashallah. So then after you finished your hifz, were you doing any type of revision or door?
I had to basically revise the Quran all over again. I had finished it. Because like I said, Sheikh Abdul Samad, he used a new technique or tactic, which was to allow me to move on.
Mm-hmm.
I started to revise, but he became more laxed.
Yeah.
He was very strict otherwise. He allowed me to move on. However, when I finished memorization of the Quran, I had done so much in such a short period of time that there was a need to thoroughly revise it all.
Mm-hmm.
So that was almost like a 1-year project.
Mashallah.
Just under a year.
And when was the first time you led Taraweeh?
I did a lot of kids Taraweeh.
Okay.
So in our masjid, we had a little area where kids would get together.
Yeah.
I think that year I started right away.
Okay, mashallah.
After I had reached the age of maturity, then I would lead in the masjid.
Okay,
And I
mashallah.
led every year.
Mashallah, since you've been leading Taraweeh for so many years, what advices would you have for someone who's looking to lead?
Repetition and years.
Mm-hmm.
Taraweeh is about confidence. It is to do with how well you memorize the Quran and how good your muraja'ah is, but it's a matter of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
The repetition gives you confidence.
Yeah,
Once you have that confidence, then you can accomplish so much and it becomes easier to read.
yeah, mashallah.
The second thing that I would say is that I feel like the Muslim community needs to step away from treating Taraweeh as a performance and treating it more and more as an ibadah.
Mashallah.
But that takes time and hard work.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that when it comes to Taraweeh, junior Huffaz who memorize the Quran should not come into the main musalla to lead Taraweeh until they've done it privately with a few friends or a few people for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
That way they clean out their reading. That way they make it a little bit, they get a little bit more comfortable. And by the time they make it to the masjid, they're not focusing on just the words, they're able to engage with the meaning.
Sure.
One of the biggest fitnas that we've seen in the history of Islam, Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali, he talks about this a lot, where he says there are these people, he speaks against them quite regularly. He calls them Qurra al-Mura'in, show off reciters,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's a big problem because the Kalam of Allah goes from being something that spiritually elevated people to becoming something that spiritually kills you. One of my ustads used to say, he said, Khuda ka shukr ada karo ke Khuda ne tumhe achhi awaaz nahi di, warna tum kisi kaam ke nahi rehte. He used to say, thank Allah that He did not give you a good voice. Otherwise, you would be of no use. You would sing nasheed and sing naats and sing songs and sing, read Quran and that's it. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Reading Quran is phenomenal. Reading nasheeds, that's all good stuff. But what happens is that you just do these things as performances. That's a problem. If someone's reading the Quran and engaging with it, that's different. Someone's just reading the Quran, they don't know what they're reading. They haven't bothered to even read the translation of what they're reading. They're just letting it happen. It's not good. My children are memorizing the Quran right now, and for me, this is very important. I'm actively working on creating a system. I don't know if I'll ever publish it because that requires more work. I'm just doing it for my own children because my kids are memorizing the Quran. An interactive method for them to memorize the Quran, where there is a true spiritual component when they're memorizing the Quran. We have young folks that spend so many years memorizing the Quran, but if you ask them, other than the memorization part, do you have a connection with the Quran, or does the message of the Quran even resonate with you? Do you even know which ayah is giving what message? They would say no. How could it be that someone spends 2-3 years to memorizing the Quran, and spiritually, there's no change that happens? That can't be acceptable. By the end of memorizing the Quran, 2-3 years later, after that much Quran reading, the children should be awliya of Allah. It's as if maybe in the last 1,000 years, the Quran memorization model has improved 3%. Nothing's improved. What we're doing right now, they were probably doing it 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
The formula hasn't changed. I'm not saying the formula should change. What I do believe is that the methodology should be reformed. But that's an undertaking within the industry. And I think those that are at the center, I know Masjid Osman's done a lot of work over the years. I've heard Sheikh Adnan, who is my brother-in-law who teaches here, he tells me, I believe Mufti Azaz, who was involved with the another masjid in Chicago, I believe, in Glendale Heights.
MSI and
Yeah. Al-Qasim. He was telling me too that there was a lot of work that they had done to improve their Quran memorization programs. And there are other people across the country that have done it. I don't mean to discredit them, but I just feel like there's a need for a whole change to occur in the industry. So that way people who do wish to have the Quran memorized for themselves or for their children, they can expect something. Something more, something better thought out.
And what advice would you have for somebody who's looking to memorize Quran?
Make sure that before you start memorizing, you are fluent in reading it, and you can read with proper pronunciation and tajweed. Makharij and takhrij and tajweed. Number 2, don't do it alone. Get a teacher. Number 3, my suggestion is join a classroom. Because when everyone gathers together and they are in person and there is an attendance sheet that's called out, you feel the system pushing you forward and stopping you from just giving up. When you try to solo it, most likely you won't get the most out of it. I also recommend for people that are memorizing the Quran to try to engage with some of the meaning of what you're reading. I'm not saying do a full-blown tafseer, but maybe have like a translation of the Quran side by side, to even just maybe once a day spend 5 minutes reading through the translation of what you just memorized. It has a big impact. It helps you connect. Consistency.
Mufti Saab, when did your kind of direction change from memorization of the Quran, obviously after you completed, but then to the Alamiya program? And why England?
As you mentioned, my focus changed from memorization to Alamiya because I had completed my memorization of the Quran, and also I had spent a few months revising it. So we felt that there was a new academic year that was starting. So we felt that I can either spend another whole year memorizing or revising, or move on to the Alim program. And my family felt that it was time to move on to the Alim program. So we then began to choose what options were available for the Alamiya program. There were a few options, I believe, in Chicago at that time. But my father wasn't keen. I think the reason why he wasn't keen on the Chicago options is because that we had relatives here, and he felt that that would be a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Just going in and out to the cousins' places, and so he didn't want us there. Buffalo remained an option, but there were two factors that pulled me towards England that ended up, making the big difference for us. The first was that the more senior teachers at Buffalo had all studied in England at the madrasa I was looking at. They had all graduated from there. And to me, in my mind, it didn't make sense that if their teachers were alive and if they were studying, why I wouldn't go study with them.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the thought that I had in my mind. The second thing was, let me explain that a little further, that first point. The teachers who taught the Alim program were very different from the teachers who taught the Hifz program. If I was going to continue studying my Alim program in Buffalo under Sheikh Abdul Samad, that would have been the option. That would have been it.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was my teacher. Loyalty to the teacher is important.
Mm-hmm.
However, I was going to move into a new set of teachers in the madrasa who I had never studied with before.
Mm-hmm.
But they had all studied in England. So I thought to myself, why wouldn't I just go there? The second thing was that when we were in Kentucky, there were many young visiting imams who had come to our community. And the ajib coincidence was all of them were from that madrasa in England, from that same madrasa. There are other factors too, but these two I would believe are the same one, are the major ones. So when my father asked me, I remember this conversation, he said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "England, let's do England." And he was very happy and very supportive.
Why did you want to do the Alim course?
When I finished memorizing the Quran, the class next door to us, that day I finished, there was a class next to us. There was a Hifz teacher there. His name was Hafiz Sulaiman. He was actually my brother's Hifz teacher. I went to him to say salam. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Did musafaha with him. I just finished. I said salam alaikum. He goes, wa alaikum salam. He had this loud salam alaikum. Wa alaikum salam, like that. I said, kya hua? What happened? So I said, Alhamdulillah, Hazrat, aaj Quran mukammal kiya. Today I finished my memorization. He goes, Tarjuma aur rajma aata hai? Do you understand any of it? I said, no. Even though he wasn't an alim himself, he said to me, Allahu alam why he said it. Now that I think about it, he said, you won't enjoy the Quran until you understand it. And that stuck to me. And that's when I realized that this is something that I wanted to do.
So how was day one going into Darul Uloom Bury?
I'm convinced that J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter after visiting Bury.
The same Hogwarts feel.
I am not kidding you. She must have some insider information on how Darul Uloom Bury worked. That place was gorgeous.
MashaAllah.
It was one of the most beautiful madrasas a person could even dream of.
MashaAllah.
It was in the mountains in the outskirts of Manchester. If you walked a little ahead, there were open fields with sheep running around. The roads that led to the madrasa were not paved, they were cobblestone.
MashaAllah.
Do you understand?
Yeah. Sure.
When you walked inside the madrasa, as soon as you walked in through the front gate, on the right side, inside the ground, carved in the grass was Darul Uloom Bury.
MashaAllah.
In the grass.
MashaAllah.
You walked in, there was a beautiful fountain there, and they had a tennis court, they had a soccer field, basketball court, cricket court. They had a greenhouse where they would grow plants there. There were trees planted all through the grounds where you can go and pick food and sit under them and read. We had peacocks on the madrasa site. They had chickens that would roam around on the madrasa site. We had a cat that would roam around in the madrasa side.
MashaAllah.
They had an area that they didn't fill it up, but they had like a pool area at the top. It was behind the bushes at the top. They had different parking lots for the staff and for the students, and then amazing, beautiful dining areas that were age appropriate. Students 16 and under had a different area for dining, and 16 and over had their own area for dining. Not one masjid, but 2 masjids in the madrasa. How many?
2.
2 masjids in the madrasa. For students who were taking the schooling along with their Islamic studies, they had a beautiful science lab and an amazing IT lab with all the bells and whistles. Right? When we would in our rooms, the room that I had when I was studying with my brother, it was on the upper part of the madrasa, and at nighttime I used to open the window and sit with my feet hanging down and studying Mishkat and Bukhari, and in front of me you can see the skyline of Manchester City just from the window, because we were in the hills. Right? Oh, it was a gorgeous place. Hazrat Mani Yusuf Mutala rahmatullahi alayhi was such a loving mentor and teacher. The food. The food. Sheikh had ensured that the students would have the best food. How he did this was that he hired a professional chef, a Burmese chef, whose job was to cook food for the students in the madrasa. Omar Bhai, his name was. His food was amazing. Whatever food he would make for the students, all staff, including Hazrat himself, would have that in the staff room. And Hazrat's philosophy was that the teacher should not have separate food from the students. If the teachers complain about the quality of the food, too much salt, too less salt, that means it's not good enough for the students. Cancel it. Do you understand?
Yeah,
quality control. In the evenings, so in the mornings, at lunchtime, they would serve rice. Evenings, they would serve roti with the salan. The roti is bread. Every single day, are you ready for this? Are you ready?
Yeah.
The roti was made for 600 students fresh by hand.
MashaAllah.
For 600 students every day.
MashaAllah.
Made by, what did I say?
Made by hand, fresh.
They would deliver them wrapped in cloth.
MashaAllah.
They would deliver them wrapped in
cloth,
tied up inside the cloth to keep them warm. They would deliver them, and then you would open it and serve them like that.
MashaAllah.
Mani Yusuf Mutala, rahimahullah ta'ala, rahmatan wasi'ah, he always desired the best for the students.
MashaAllah.
And that ihsan of his, that standard that he created, it was very well felt. Keep in mind, I had just come from a madrasa that was previously a juvenile. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The psychological impact that this had, where now you were in open fields and you were walking around. During our breaks, Hazrat would go for a walk up the hill, up the mountain. We'd go with him. Just walking with him, taking a stroll outside. You know, it was the whole experience was surreal. Someone actually did a video. I'm trying to think, what do they call that?
A day in the life?
Is that what it's called? What's it called?
Like a Darul Uloom student or something like that?
There's what's that game called where kids, they make artificial worlds?
That's Sims? I'm not too sure.
Not Sims, but kind of like it. It's a famous game that young folks play where they create their own world. Someone listening right now knows exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, someone made one for Darul Uloom.
Oh, no way.
It's epically accurate.
MashaAllah.
It's some sort of a simulation. It's scary how accurate it is. Yeah. I was watching it the other day with my kids and I was showing them. I said, guys, this is where I studied. And the guy, he created it in this gaming world. And then he did a tour of it. And you're walking around. He got every detail.
MashaAllah.
There was a balcony outside the upstairs masjid where Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah used to stand. We used to call it Hazrat's balcony. That's what it was called. No one else stood there.
Yeah.
It was bad adab. He would stand there after salah, in between salah. And when I saw that balcony in the game, it brought tears to our eyes. Good memories.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah.
It was a balcony. On one side, there was a window where you can see outside. And then there was there were 2 seats there in case there were guests coming. He would sit with them there. England was amazing.
As you went down this path already, you've been speaking a little bit about Mawlana Yusuf rahimahullah. Can you share with us a little bit more about him and your other teachers at the madrasa?
Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala was a man that is only seen once a generation. You don't see them too frequently. The amazing thing about them is the fact that they are unknown. If you search the internet for his name and go on YouTube, you might be lucky to find 1 or 2 videos of him online.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there was a lecture he gave in Barbados and Panama regarding Aisha radiallahu anha. A recording of that can be found online. But otherwise, these people, they live their lives being hidden, serving the deen. I remember once I was with Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala and we were driving. When I was doing my iftah, he injured his shoulder. So he wasn't able to drive and he was getting ready for surgery. So he had many doctor's appointments. So he asked me to drive him around.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to drive him. And in those car rides, we would have conversations. It was just the two of us. And they were amazing, amazing conversations. They were so rich. So one day he said to me, Hussein, be like the wealthy people. Be like the wealthy people. I was puzzled. So what does that mean? He said that if you look around you, they've invested in all the companies that produce the things that are surrounding you. Yet their names can't even be found in the phone books. Kaam charo tarafo, that the effect of what you're doing should be everywhere. But as far as your name goes, keep it hidden.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need to be in the spotlight of things. Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala grew up in India and he studied his earlier dirasat in Gujarat. However, he then went to study in Saharanpur alongside his brother, Sheikh Abdul Rahim Mutala rahimahullah ta'ala. Both brothers became very close to Sheikh al-Hadith Maulana Muhammad Zakaria Kandahli rahmatullahi alayhi. He loved them both very dearly. Sheikh Abdul Rahim Mutala actually became the scribe of Sheikh Zakaria rahmatullahi alayhi. He used to write his letters for him. And Sheikh Yusuf Mutala was then sent by Sheikh Zakaria Kandahli rahmatullahi alayhi to England to open a madrasa. It was the first of its type in Europe. Later on, many madaris were opened, but his was the first. When he came to England, he had a really hard time. Language barrier. He experienced immense anxiety at the separation of his teacher, because now Sheikh Zakaria was back in India. And he would write these letters to Sheikh Zakaria rahmatullahi alayhi that I want to come back to India. I don't want to be here. But Sheikh Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala constantly told him to stay there. As a result of which, a team of teachers were gathered together and this beautiful madrasa was established. And students graduated from this madrasa, Al-Arabiya Al-Islamiyya, and they spread through the world doing khidmah of the deen. And each person was making an attempt to see if they could replicate the work that Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala was doing. So Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, the amazing thing about him was that not only was he a compassionate, knowledgeable, wise, intellectual, eloquent teacher, mentor, but it was the fact that he really emphasized the importance of tazkiyah. For him, tasawwuf was a very big thing. People have been skeptical of tasawwuf through history. Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala was a champion of it. He really believed in it. At the time, one of the other common circles, there was a very big influence of tablighi work in America and also in England and throughout the world. This is all prior to the recent divide. And in gatherings of tabligh, the level of tasawwuf they were willing to engage with was very surface level. It was, do some basic adhkar but these people, they believed in true tasawwuf, one that involved mujahada and hard work, and that if the heart of the insan is changed and if you're able to really impact that, then the world is open before you.
Mhm.
He would always encourage us to be in gatherings of dhikr.
Sure.
When we would sit with him, we would read books on the lives of the mashayikh,
Sure.
read the works of some of the great scholars of the past.
Sure.
And when we left his company, there was without doubt a spiritual change that had occurred. And we saw it in him too. I saw it in him. So the impact that Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala had on us was profound, because he was a great scholar of phenomenal caliber, of seniority, a person who was a master in ilm and tasawwuf. But on top of all of that, he was a visionary. This, what I'm about to say right now, is going to sound a little weird for those of you guys that are young and are still studying or are on the cusp of graduating. In the late 90s, early 2000s, when ulama graduated from madrasa, the idea that these ulama would then go on to study at universities was unfathomable. Scrap that. Forget unfathomable. It was looked down upon. It was disgusting. It was a sign of selling out and deviance. What was the point of studying the deen? Were you always going to go after the dunya? Don't you know when you go to the universities, you're going to have to study with kafirs? Don't you know when you go to the universities, there are going to be women walking around? Are you saying that you're going to go to university and take your thobe off? What's going to happen to your beard? How are you going to pray Jum'ah Salah? So if you go there and you study Islam, are you going to lose your iman in the process? So these were some really heavy accusations made. In that time in England, in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala already started encouraging all the students to go to university.
Inshallah.
There were some students that had actually graduated from their PhDs after Alamiya program. They went and they did their PhDs. Hazrat, in order to emphasize this point, the importance of sending students to universities, he held a graduation for them in the Darulum on their PhD doctoral graduations.
Mashallah.
The ulama at that time in England, majority of them, they viewed Hazrat's actions as outright disrespect to the deen and a sellout of the students. I used to read some of the hate mail. I would hear what ulama were saying because I would travel, and then I would go there and a community, and someone would ask, "Where are you from?" And I would say, "Oh, I'm studying at Darul Bury." And man, I would have to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
It was bad. It was bad. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him for his vision and farsightedness. That today, when you look back at it, not only do you see all the other ulama are also going to universities,
Mashallah.
but that's not really an argument, by the way, because it could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
But what does matter is when you look at how his vision paid off.
Allah.
Now, when you go across the UK, you see these professionals that are serving in all walks of life, whether it's as physicians, lawyers, they're serving as chaplains, and they're all alims as well.
Mashallah.
What he did was, he saw something. And this is something I say to the students at Qalam Seminary. Because I say to them, what makes you unique? There are students studying in Darul Ulooms across the world. There are so many madrasas in America. What makes you different? you can't say relevance, because anyone that claims relevance is just, they have nothing left to claim in the dunya. You know what I mean? You know that masjid that says we're relevant to the youth? There's nothing left to claim.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That now I'm claiming relevance. Such a subjective, almost trashy claim to make. It's almost condescending to other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm relevant. To who? So then I say to them, when you graduate, what are you going to do? And I say to them, look, I want you all to start. I'm hoping that each of you starts working in the Muslim community, in the masjids. But I want you to be prepared and have the skill set, have the vision to find an area that you can carve out to serve the deen outside the four walls of the masjid. You have to become creative there. Find ways to engage the ummah outside the four walls of the masjid. We are not unmosking. We're not doing that. Rather, what we're saying is that when we look at the demographic right now of the Muslim ummah, most people are not in the masjid. I need you to go find it now. And I want you to do it professionally. I want you to do it as a life sort of commitment. That this is what I'm going to do. I tell them to always start by serving in the masjid, because that's where your tarbiyah happens. By serving in a masjid, the community straightens you out. I'm an imam. I'm going 15 years right now, alhamdulillah.
Mashallah.
And I get cussed out every now and then too. Someone will come to me after Jummah and just lay it thick on me, you know. And each time that happens, there's an opportunity for growth for yourself. And I think ultimate growth happens when you're able to hear someone cuss you out, and there is no anger that bursts out of your heart because you've spiritually learned to control it. And you're able to stand there and just nod your head and just listen to that person. Obviously, if it's blasphemy, then you shouldn't listen to them, but I'm just talking about the average community member lash out that happens.
So can you tell me a little bit about Maulana Hashim?
Maulana Hashim was also one of the direct students of Sheikh Zakaria Kandal. He is also one of the more senior scholars in England. He still is alive.
MashaAllah.
Maulana Hashim, his sons, both of them, Sheikh Rashid and Sheikh Khalil, when they were younger, they had actually visited us as imams for Taraweeh in Ramadan in Kentucky.
Oh, subhanAllah.
They had both come.
MashaAllah.
And they were a tremendous inspiration for us to go to England. You know how I said there were multiple factors?
Yeah.
They were as well.
MashaAllah.
And when my father tried to get us admitted into Bury, the wait list was way too long. We didn't have a chance.
Yeah, MashaAllah.
Maulana Khalil was the one who pulled some strings and made some phone calls, and he got us in. Sheikh Hashim, he taught one period in the whole Alamiya program.
Allah.
So you had one opportunity to study with him and one alone.
MashaAllah.
And that was the study of Sunan Abi Dawud.
MashaAllah.
He used to teach it.
MashaAllah.
He was someone that had so much mahabba for ilm, so much love for it. He used to teach us Abu Dawud. However, due to his health conditions, he was no longer able to sit on the ground. So he would sit from the chair and teach. Those books were so big that he couldn't hold it, so we got a table for him to put the book down on.
Yeah, MashaAllah.
Then his legs started hurting, so he wasn't able to sit. So then they created a platform for him to extend his legs on. But he continued teaching.
MashaAllah.
His eyesight got weak. He couldn't see the words anymore, because if you look at the more old texts, everything's kind of squeezed into pages and there's a lot of writing. So we then acquired a massive magnifier that fitted over the whole book, that he could then sit and read through in big reading. He insisted on reading the ibarah, the text to Abu Dawud himself. He would not allow any student to read it.
Oh, no way.
He would read the whole thing.
MashaAllah.
The whole thing.
MashaAllah.
I once went to visit him after I got married. And we went to England. My wife was with me. I said to her, let's go meet Sheikh Hashim. I had heard that he was at the hospital. And he was hospitalized for some time. So when I went to the hospital to meet him, they said that he checked out earlier today.
Oh.
So my wife said, where are we going to go? Are we going to go to his house to meet him? I said, no. Sheikh Hashim didn't go home. It's 2:00. It's Abu Dawood time.
MashaAllah.
So we went to the madrasa, and he was there teaching Abu Dawood.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah.
And I thought to myself, subhanAllah, this man and his devotion to ilm. Sheikh Hashim, I have an interesting story about it. There's so many of them, but I'll share one story. In our madrasa, they had this annual competition that took place. It was a speech competition to see how the students were, and they would compete against each other. There was a whole stage phase, and then there was quarterfinal. It's like a tournament, you know what I mean? The World Cup. So they had this whole setup thing going on, and students were competing for the highest score to win the competition. I tried every year, but man, did I fail. I was not a good public speaker. True story. Every year I got nowhere near the top, seats of the competition. I actually had some really funny stories of how bad I was at speaking. There were so many times where people would laugh me off. Because in the madrasa, you have students and they all know their stuff. And they're all very competent and they're great trolls. You want to see a madrasa, you want to see a troll, you go to a madrasa.
Yeah.
Those young guys, with their madrasa English, they will troll you in a way that you will feel as if nasiya mansiya, as if that you weren't even born that day. You know what I mean? Mittu qabla hada wa kuntu nasiya mansiya. As Maryam alayhi salam said, I wish I had died before this day. So I then gave up on competing in the English portion of the competition. I signed up to compete in the Arabic department. Now, there were some other students that were from Saudi and the Middle East and stuff. They had all signed up too. I somehow made it to the end. And I had prepared this lecture, and my lecture was right before Maghrib. So I got up to speak. And as I was starting my lecture, Sheikh Hashim came in. He used to always come for Salah a little early. They would bring him on a wheelchair. He couldn't walk. So they bring him on the wheelchair. And he would go to the far left of the masjid, the front saf, far left against the wall. His chair would be there. He would sit on the chair and pray Salah. So he parked his chair there. He sat down. He was just doing some dhikr and dua. And I started my lecture. Keep in mind, this is a Shaykh al-Hadith, and I am not in my final year, which means I have never studied with him. I've only seen him from far away and heard amazing things about him, and I'm really in awe and intimidated by this individual. He is a student of Sheikh Zakaria rahmatullah alayhi, and I'm a kid from E-Town, Kentucky. Okay? So I'm just starting this lecture, and he's sitting on the side. He stops his dhikr, and he turns towards me. And I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I just kept going, and I kept going and going and going. And I just gave my whole lecture. After the lecture was over, he sent one of the students, go call him. So then he called me. He then said to me that lecture that you gave was so heart-touching, I was in tears.
Allahu Akbar.
And I was like, what? That's the first compliment someone's ever given me on a lecture. He then said, come to me after Salah, I'll give you some books. Do mutala of them.
Yeah.
Allah will give you barakah.
MashaAllah.
He gave me a pile of books that I have till today.
MashaAllah. So, Mufti Sahib, how long was your curriculum in total?
In Darul Buri, it really depended on which track you took. Without the IFTA program, it could be easily 8-9 years. If you took the shortest track, you would be done in 6 years.
Okay, mashallah.
Ula, thaniya, thalitha, rabia, khamisa, dawra. 6 years done. Now, you could add an i'dadiyah, which was a preparation year. That would make it 7. Then if you took school classes, if you were taking extra credit hours for school and stuff, then the Arabic year can be done over 2 years. The second year can be done over 2 years. The third year can be done over 2 years. The fourth, 6th, No, 4th, 5th, and 6th, those cannot be done over 2 years. Those had to be done in one go straight. And if you did the i'dadiyya on top of that, the beginner year, that made it a total of
10 years.
10 years. 10 years is the full. It could have been a 10-year program,
Wow.
depending on what track you took.
Yeah.
The track that I took made my alim program let me think about what I just said. That's not correct. It could have been 8 years max, not 10 years. 8 years max. I know where I got it wrong, but there's no point explaining it. It's just technicalities.
Yeah.
It could be a maximum 8 years. I did it in 7.
Okay, mashallah.
I did the 7-year track without an i'dadiyya. You could add an i'dadiyya and make it 8, sorry. And my brother skipped both and he did 6.
Okay, mashallah. And you're simultaneously going to school in terms of like college.
This was necessary for Hazrat. Sheikh Yusuf Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he required students to do it, their school. And it wasn't just any school. Like I'm talking about the schooling program they had in Darul Uloom Buri and Madrasa Arabiya Islamiyya was top tier.
Mashallah.
I'm talking about top. Our English teacher who we studied English with, she was a white lady from, like, when you looked at her, it felt like she was from Victorian England.
Oh, subhanallah.
Miss Barbara Smethurst.
Mashallah.
Like she was, wow, her English was, you know how like when you say the word what, it's actually pronounced? When you pronounce that word, it's supposed to be what.
Oh, with a little emphasis on the H?
So she used to always say to us, because she pronounced it properly.
Yeah.
And she would say to us that when you pronounce this word, you pronounce the H first, the W second.
Interesting.
Why?
Yeah.
I can't say it right. I'm probably saying it wrong still. I got in a lot of trouble for that. She was very proper. Everything.
Mashallah.
She viewed it to be barbaric if a person holds their teacup with more than 2 or 3 fingers.
Subhanallah.
She would always say that when you drink tea, you flare your elbow out. When you sip, this is the right way. Very proper.
Very
Everything. I'm telling you. There was an adab, a British adab. That was her. And like this, there were specialists who came. There was a Mr. Saber, who was a mathematician and a half. So there were people, they had gathered some strong talent to teach the students. And when because they had standardized testing in the United Kingdom, it's called GCSE. All students graduating from the 10th grade have to take it.
Okay, mashallah.
You know how in America we have 12 grades?
Yeah.
In England they have 10, 2 years for A levels, and then college.
Okay.
So the 10th grade, all students from across England had to take it. And it was very common for Darul Uloom Buri. You would usually, in that whole, they don't call them states there, they call them provinces. I don't know what they call them in England. Like a region, region, you know? In that whole region, we would be in like the top 10
mashallah.
schools of the whole region.
Mashallah.
Public, private, all of them.
Mashallah.
So it was really cool.
And how are you guys able to balance time between the Alamiya program and then secular
The schedule
studies?
was cut out for you.
Okay.
That was a job of the Nazim.
Mashallah.
They would create a schedule where everyone's studies would be taken care of.
And then I know you've mentioned earlier before that, mashallah, once, your mindset is once you start something, you're going to finish something. But was there ever a time where it got extremely difficult in madrasa, where you wanted to potentially switch madaris or even take a pause?
It wasn't an option. Like, I mean that.
Yeah.
There was never a thought.
Mashallah.
Zero.
Mashallah.
That option never existed.
Mashallah.
Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure if you get it. It didn't exist. It's not a matter of one day you may have thought it.
Yeah.
There was never an option. The policy is that once you start something, you have to see it through to the end.
Mashallah.
I think the only time in my studies, in my Alamiya studies or my Hifz studies, where there was a conversation for me to discontinue was 9/11.
Allah.
That was the one time. It had nothing to do with religion. It had nothing to do with my studies or the madrasa or anything. The issue was that we weren't sure if, there was so much uncertainty then.
Yeah.
That's the truth. Muslim advocacy in America was nowhere near where it is today. Muslims were not as educated about their rights and just the overall protocol of things like they are today. So my parents were terrified. What if we were never allowed to enter into America again? I know that sounds weird. Like, why would they think that? But that's just how it was.
Yeah.
You understand? They weren't sure. So then my father actually canceled our tickets. After 9/11, he said, you're not going back to England. There's a scholar in Canada, Sheikh Zakaria. Have you met him?
Sheikh Zakaria Patel?
Patel.
Yes.
I have a very long relationship with him.
MashaAllah.
From my childhood. He wasn't even married at the time. That's like a whole dastan, a whole story of Sheikh Zakaria and my love for him. His father, so my mother, what she did was when my dad canceled our tickets, my mother called Sheikh Zakaria's mother. They were besties. These two were besties. They talked sometimes daily on the phone. My mother didn't have a spiritual mentor, so Sheikh Zakaria's mother was my mother's mentor. She used to tell my mother everything what to do. My mom used to listen to her. So she called her to tell her that, my husband and I have decided we're not sending the kids. So she said, really? You're not sending your kids to study? She said, no. So she said, okay. She put the phone down. We were sitting in the living room. My dad got a phone call. It was Ibrahim Bhai Jagwaria, Sheikh Zakaria's father. He called my dad. Assalamu alaikum. Abdurazak bhai bol rahe. Is this my dad's name? Abdurazak. He Abdurazak. He goes, yes. He goes, who do you think you are? Tum apne aap ko kya samajhte ho? Who do you think you are? My dad's usually a hothead guy. Someone said that to him, he will smack the chane out of their mouth. Like he'll go after that guy.
Yeah.
But I don't know what happened that moment. My dad's like, what do you mean? He said, Allah has planned to use your kids for the khidmah of the deen. You think you can stop them? He goes, go ahead, stop them. Let's see what happens. I don't know what happened. He just spoke to my dad in a very stern, firm, borderline, angry voice.
Yeah.
Not borderline, definitely angry voice. And my dad just said, okay, Brahma, they're going back to madrasa.
MashaAllah.
And he said, Alhamdulillah. And we went back.
MashaAllah.
That's it.
That's it.
So if you ask me when was the one time that we almost left or we considered leaving or swapping madrasas or said, I'm not doing this anymore or going back home, that was the one time.
SubhanAllah.
There was never another time.
MashaAllah. And Mufti, tell us about, how was it going into your final year of studies in Dora Hadith?
It was a change in pace. In the Dora Hadith year, Dora Hadith is very interesting. It wasn't a part of the original Dars-e-Nizami curriculum. Shah Waliullah Muhaddid Dahlawi rahmatullahi alayhi insisted on adding it. It was added. The purpose was to have a heavier influence of hadith in the curriculum. Now, when you read Dawrah Hadith, you have to ask yourself, what's the purpose? Are you reading it to just cover the narrations and get the barakah? In which case, someone can argue that's a shallow reading of hadith because you don't even really understand what you read. You just put it on speed read. What are you reading? But the argument can be made that it's a barakah factor. And then there are some subtle lessons the student does gain. For example, just overall loyalty to hadith, and then your reading proficiency and so on. Or you study the Dawrah Hadith, the authentic, the 6 authentic collections of hadith. But you're doing it to understand what the author was doing with the book. In order to do that, you can't read all 6 books from beginning to end. There's no way to do it. So in our madrasa, they had a little bit of both. There were some teachers who used to focus on just reading the whole book from beginning to end, while there were other teachers whose focus was on highlighting the different riwayah and diraya issues under that text, chain and text related issues in that text. So they would open those issues up further. Regardless of how you looked at it, the workload increased tenfold overnight. So I was saying that in Dawra Hadith, in the previous year, in the 5th year, we were all covering subjects that we had studied for many years before.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as Hadith goes, we were reading Mishkat, and there were maybe 6,000 narrations studied the full year.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in Dawra Hadith. Sahih Muslim has 12,000 narrations.
Mm-hmm.
One book.
Yeah.
Bukhari has another 7,000 narrations. So you're doing so much more volume. The workload increased right away. And it was, honestly, it's overwhelming.
And how was it leading up to graduation, and how was graduation itself?
How was it leading up to graduation? Well, there were definitely points where you felt extremely overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
It was tough. Forget about class preparation and revision.
Yeah.
Just the class attendance was overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Because the teachers were no longer, you said leading up to graduation, right? The teachers were no longer just teaching their periods. Mm-hmm. They were now teaching in the breaks. They were teaching after Fajr. They were teaching after Maghrib. And it was like all day, you're just going at it nonstop. And then in our madrasa, one of the requirements for graduation was that you had to do a 40-day i'tikaf. All students had to do a
40-day i'tikaf.
40-day i'tikaf. And we all know that in i'tikaf, you have to fast. Otherwise, the i'tikaf doesn't count. So you were fasting for 40 days, doing i'tikaf for 40 days with 45, 50 other guys, and you have to do all your Dawra Hadith stuff.
It was tough. That's tough.
It's tough. But it makes you. It makes something out of you. Basically, it teaches you a lesson that you don't stop. You just keep going. You put your head down and you do the work. You don't pay attention to the noise around you. Everyone's going to have something to say. Everyone is. Someone's going to say you're doing this right. Someone's going to say you're doing this wrong. You focus on what needs to be done. Do shura with people that matter and get it done. Someone do.
Yeah.
Just get it done. I think that was a lesson that I learned from my studies. And then graduation, you asked, how was that? It was beautiful. When we graduated, there were maybe 8,000-9,000 people in attendance. They used to rent out this massive tent, and people from all over the country would gather for the graduation. One very interesting thing happened when we graduated. There was a visiting scholar who was invited to speak at the graduation. And Sheikh Yusuf was very particular about who spoke to the students. Mm-hmm. So if someone visited the Darul Buri and they thought they were going to get a chance to give nasiha to the students, forget about it. Like in the number of years that we were students, if you ask me, other than the durus that we had in class, how many scholars lectured us? Mm-hmm. Maybe in 9 years, there were like 5 people.
Subhanallah. Wow.
You get it? Like,
Inshallah.
He was very particular about who addressed the students. So there was one particular scholar who was asked to not only address the students, but at the graduation. And Sheikh Yusuf was going to be sitting in attendance too. Inshallah. His older brother, Sheikh Yusuf's older brother, Sheikh Abdul Rahim, he's the one who actually did our graduation. Inshallah. He actually read the last ahadith for us. Now what happened was that visiting scholar was asked to give a dars in the madrasa. I think it was the iftitah or ikhtitam of Mishkat, opening or closing of Mishkat dars for the upcoming year. So he did that dars, and in that dars, you ever been in a gathering where the sheikh kind of just loses it? When I say loses it, I mean like he just decides to go off protocol. He's doing whatever he wants to, right? So that's what happened. He was just sitting there. Khuda jane what happened to him. He looked up. He saw the attire of the students that were sitting there. Mm-hmm. he said something about their attire, and then he said something about another person, and then just started saying something else. And then he said something about Hazrat Shaykh al-Hadith rahmatullahi alayhi, and how Hazrat Shaykh rahmatullahi alayhi got this particular thing wrong, which is possible, but the way he said it,
Yeah.
he just went unhinged. And then he just started saying a lot of maybe uncalled things
Yeah.
about some of the mashayikh. And that gathering then ended. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in the madrasa was like, what just happened there?
Yeah.
What was that? Sheikh Yusuf rahimahullah found out. And he called that person to the office,
Mm-hmm.
this scholar. And then he canceled his invitation.
Subhanallah.
He said, someone who speaks like this about our mashayikh will not speak to our students. We were 24 hours away from graduation.
Subhanallah.
And he didn't allow him to speak.
Subhanallah.
And actually, when we graduated, they would usually tie the turbans of the students in front of the big majma,
Mm-hmm.
big gathering. That year, they canceled that part of the ceremony. And then Sheikh Yusuf, when we came back to the madrasa, in the actual Bury madrasa, they would do the tent near Birmingham in a place called Kidderminster. They would.
Mhm.
It's more central in England. So when we came back to Manchester, up north, to the madrasa in Bury, so that was outskirts of Manchester. He held a special gathering after Dhuhr Salah on a random day.
Mm-hmm.
And in that gathering, he then gave a speech and then tied our turbans himself.
Allah.
He gave a passionate speech.
MashaAllah.
I wrote down the whole speech, by the way. I have it at
Mashallah.
home, written down.
MashaAllah.
Because I was sitting there and I had a feeling that he was going to say something, because he wasn't a person of great speech, but if anyone spoke about Shaykh al-Hadith Muhammad Zakaria Khan Dahlawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he wouldn't hold back then.
MashaAllah.
And then he gave this fiery, powerful, passionate speech.
MashaAllah. And when did you decide to do ifta and takhassus in fiqh?
After I graduated from my Alamiya program.
So it wasn't like before you finished, you were already deciding to go into that program.
When I was doing my last year, I started planning it.
And why did you want to get into fiqh?
Hanafi fiqh is, for me, a very massive logical formula.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an equation, if you know what I'm talking about. Or at least those who have studied Hanafi fiqh to an advanced level will understand what I mean. And I was always very much fascinated by the Hanafi fiqh. And so when given the opportunity to do a specialization in it, considering the scholars who were teaching the iftar program at that time, Mufti Shabir Saab being at the head of it, Sheikh Sufi Tahir Wadi Saab being at the head of it, I loved that program, and I thought I wanted to be in there. And alhamdulillah, I was able to get into it.
MashaAllah. And what was you stayed there for 2 years?
It's a year and a half, 2-year program.
MashaAllah.
You can finish it off even in a year.
Okay, MashaAllah.
There are certain requirements that need to be met.
How was the feeling of leaving England?
Bittersweet. Bitterness is that you're leaving your teachers.
Mm-hmm.
When you spent that much time with them, leaving them is akin to leaving your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that studied in a madrasa will admit that they become your family.
MashaAllah.
These are people whose du'as you rely on, whose character you study, whose jokes bring happiness to you.
MashaAllah.
And then you have to separate with them.
MashaAllah.
Sweet is because you feel that now it's time for me to do what they've trained me to do.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, there was a lot of bitterness and there were tears. There's no doubt about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also a lot of excitement.
What advices would you have for somebody who's looking to study Deen or is currently studying?
The first thing I would say is give it everything you have. Don't half it. Don't just give it a little bit of your effort or time. Try to give it everything you have, because the world out there needs scholars that are properly trained and able to critically challenge the issues that stand before us. We don't need people who are going to regurgitate what's already in books. We need people to be able to critically engage with the world that we have in front of us using the texts and teachings of the traditional scholars of the past and present. We are, at least I'd like to identify us as traditionalists. We believe in the tradition. We believe in the Qur'an, Sunnah. We believe in fiqh. We understand the value of ulama. Repeating what they've said only pushes you away from the common people. You have to learn to package what they said and present it in a way that it's digestible, that it makes sense. What they say already makes sense. You have to learn how to now present that to the people in front of you. Try to keep a hand or a pulse. Try to keep your hand on the pulse of the community while you're studying. If you study Islam in pure isolation, you will assume that the implementation of Islam also occurs in a vacuum. But if you engage with the real world while you're studying, the Islam you walk out with will also look for a practical side to it that impacts the real world. So for those of you that are studying the deen, studying Islam, it's very important you give it your best, number one. Number two, try to understand and ask yourself, how is what I'm studying going to benefit me? As an individual, anything can benefit you, because if you're smart and you're somewhat dynamic, you'll figure out a way to make things work. But the world and the ummah out there is not as forgiving, or they're not as accommodating. Our job as traditionalists, the greatest task that we have as traditionalists is to present the tradition to people, to present it to the ummah, to present it to the world out there in a way that they can understand it. Take them into consideration. So that's one thing that I would advise students who are studying right now.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khairan for that, Mufti Saab. MashaAllah, you've been going for Hajj for quite some time now, MashaAllah. So I did want to ask you, how was your first Hajj experience?
It was amazing.
MashaAllah.
So from the madrasa, they used to send a qafila for Hajj every year.
MashaAllah.
There was a group of people that would go from the madrasa. All the teachers who were going that year, students would join them.
MashaAllah.
Every year they had a group that would go from madrasa. So I was reaching the age of maturity. So I said to my mother that, Mom, there are these students who go for Hajj and the teachers who go for Hajj every year from the madrasa. It would be awesome if I could go. So my mother said, Berta, I'll send you. So first, that year, she sent my brother. And the year after, she sent me. And I had gone to Hajj with my teachers. That was an amazing journey. It's a whole story of its own. But my mother was such that when she saw how happy it made me and she was able to accomplish this task of sending me on Hajj, she made it a point then to send me for Hajj every year after that.
Allahu Akbar.
From that year, I never missed Hajj in my life.
MashaAllah.
Last year when I led Eid al-Adha in my community, I said to my congregation, this is the first time in my life I'm leading this prayer. I've never read Eid al-Adha as a baligh person, not in congregation, not in alone. I've never done it before. This is new right here, this whole thing. Obviously, it's the same as Eid al-Fitr, so it's not really that new, right? But it's just something to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. That it opened up a door He opened up a door to do Hajj, and my mother worked very hard for us to do that. She would make rotis and sell them and collect money through the year. So we could go for Hajj. And then we used to go for Hajj every year, my brother and I. And then after we graduated, Allah Azza wa Jal opened up other doors, and alhamdulillah, that silsila continues. We take a Hajj group every year now too.
MashaAllah. And Mufti Saab, I know the time is short. You've spent time as an imam at ICC, and now you're an imam in Masjid Al-Rahman in Carrollton. You spent time as an instructor at Darul Qasim, and now you're at Darul Hikmah when it was still alive. MashaAllah, rest in peace. And MashaAllah, now you serve as an instructor at Qalam Institute. So can you just share with us a little bit about Qalam, MashaAllah, the amazing and beautiful things that you guys are currently doing?
Qalam Institute is a very special organization to me. I was involved with Qalam long before I had moved to Dallas. I remember Qari Nu'man, who is now the Imam at IFS.
MashaAllah.
He had just taken a position in Milwaukee. He was new there. And he held this retreat. And in that retreat, he invited myself and Sheikh Abdul Nasir. So it was in the winter. It was very cold. I remember it was snowy outside. And Sheikh Abdul Nasir and I were sitting in the car together, and we were going to the next party or engagement or whatever it was, the next event.
Mm-hmm.
So we were driving together, and Sheikh asked me, so what are you thinking? And I said, look, I've been thinking of something. And I presented this idea. My brother and I had been discussing starting an organization between the two of us in Chicago. We were thinking about this idea. So I was presenting it to Sheikh Abdul Nasir that this is a sort of idea that we have. We were going to call it just kind of like the Learning Center. That's it. Something very generic.
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't even given the name too much thought. And he then said to me, this is exactly what I've been thinking, and I'm going to launch the seminary in a few weeks.
Allah.
So I said to him, then instead of me starting it again, I'm going to join you.
MashaAllah.
Let's do this together.
MashaAllah.
You start it. Inshallah, give me some time. Then after a few years, I started teaching at the Qalam Seminary from distance. I would go out there once or twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly that grew until it was no longer feasible for me to travel back and forth, and it was just time to move altogether.
MashaAllah.
What I like about Qalam is that they created a funnel-like model, like a big V,
Mm-hmm.
where they have certain programs that are based out to the wide audiences. And then as you continue, the programs specialize and focus on fewer and fewer students.
MashaAllah.
So for example, like we're doing this podcast right now, at Qalam, we have something called the Qalam Podcast.
Yeah, MashaAllah.
The Qalam Podcast has a listening body of 8 million people.
Allahu Akbar.
It is a really big body.
MashaAllah.
When I travel, I can't tell you how often this happens, where if Sheikh Abdul Nasir and I are just standing in the airport, just getting coffee and just chilling or chatting, because we're both very jocular people. We always joke around and goof around. Ustad Murphy, Sheikh Mikhail, we just have we have a vibe. So we'll just be sitting there joking or laughing, and someone will come and they'll say any one of the instructors' names. Are you Sheikh Mikhail? Or are you Ustad Murphy? Or are you Sheikh Abdul Nasir? I've been listening to your voice for years. It's the first time I'm seeing your face.
Allahu Akbar.
This happens in Mecca, happens in Medina. I can't tell you how many times.
Allah.
Because the Qalam Podcast has a very broad appeal.
MashaAllah.
Then we created something called the intensives, where students from across America gather together in Dallas for 7 days or 6 days or 10 days.
MashaAllah.
Hundreds of students gather together every year. And the next one we have is the Sira Intensive in December. And there will probably be hundreds of students there again.
MashaAllah.
We do traveling programs, Hajj programs. So this is where students get a little bit more attention. And it's not just a one-off lecture listening through their headphones. It's live human interaction.
Yeah.
In COVID, we started offering online classes. And because there were a lot of people at home and people wanted to learn about Islam, we basically waived all the fees for our online classes.
MashaAllah.
As a result of that, what happened was from last year, March, until this year, June, when we ran the numbers of how many people took our online classes, it surpassed 16,000 people.
Allahu Akbar.
Over 16,000 people.
Allahu Akbar.
So one thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with at Qalam is reach.
MashaAllah.
Getting the word out for us, or acquiring an attending body, has been the easier goal. And I don't think that's just by coincidence. Obviously, it's the fadl of Allah. That's straight. There's no other way to look at this. But secondly, Sheikh Abdul Nasir, myself, Ustad Murphy, Sheikh Mikhail, and the other instructors, we all put multiple years into working on the Muslim community nationwide,
MashaAllah. MashaAllah.
not limiting ourselves to a particular demographic or a particular set group of people who we already agreed with, rather going to areas that may be questionable by engaging with people who are skeptical of us, but engaging those people.
MashaAllah.
So then we came to the Qalam Seminary, which launched 10 years ago. And the idea behind the Qalam Seminary was to create students to learn Islam.
MashaAllah.
We have the 1-year Arabic program, which is a unique program. Unique, I use that word carefully, because Ustad Ubaidullah, who put the program together, he's a Qalam grad.
MashaAllah.
He created a program that's appropriate for the average American learner.
MashaAllah.
It's honestly, my sister took the Arabic program at Qalam. No Islamic education at all. Does not know a single lick of Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing. Okay? In her mid-30s at the time.
Sure.
Mother of 3 at the time.
MashaAllah.
She came and she took it.
MashaAllah.
At the end of that academic year, she is now capable of understanding 70-80% of the Quran.
Allahu Akbar. MashaAllah.
Ustad Ubaidullah has created a system that works.
MashaAllah.
He does not use a classical Nahu book or a classical Sarf book, none of it. He created his own system.
MashaAllah.
Everything is very carefully crafted on how he believes Arabic should be taught,
MashaAllah.
which means you start doing translation of the Quran and tarkeeb, grammatical breakdown of the verses of the Quran, weeks from day one.
Allah.
2-3 weeks later, you're doing it.
MashaAllah.
Does that make sense?
MashaAllah.
So that's the Arabic program.
MashaAllah.
Then we have a 2nd-year program. It's another 1-year program. So there's a 1-year program. Students come, take Arabic, and they learn the fundamentals of Islam, and they can leave if they want to. That's probably the one class at Qalam that has the most students. Every year we're sold out. I think this year we have maybe over 100 students in that class.
MashaAllah.
Now the second one, by the way, these are students who are taking this class full-time.
MashaAllah.
Full-time means 5 days a week, 7-8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have another 1-year program, which internally we call the seminary year. And it's basically an enrichment program. It's where now you take the Arabic you learned and you study some more texts and you develop yourself. All the texts are in Arabic that you're studying. You have to be able to read Arabic, translate Arabic. Some students take this online, some take it in person, some take just one period, then take the next period the next year. And they're basically in it to study the deen over the next 30 years of their life. You know, they're taking it super slow, super easy. The people who graduate from the 2nd year, after they're done graduating, they might just head back home. Like people at the end of year 1, they go back home.
Mm-hmm.
Some might study 1 more year and just head back home. The idea is that now these people are prepared to be khatibs in the community. They could be assistants for the imam, you know, just contributors. But minor contributors, mostly enrichment. Some students then choose to stay behind for the next 3 years, which is what we call the Alamiya program. Now, this is where the real work happens. This is now where they're reading the more advanced texts. This is where they're doing the Sihasitta. Now they're reading Hidayah, Mishkat, Jalalain, Baydawi. Now this is where they're reading Sharh al-Aqeedah. They're reading Sharh al-Wiqaya. These are all advanced, somewhat advanced texts. Bidayat al-Mujtahid for comparative fiqh, and so on. The goal is at the end of these 3 years, we are now able to create contributors. Enrichment, year 2, contribution, year 3. After the next 3 years, at the end of the 5 years. Alhamdulillah, so far, we've been able to graduate over 28 students from the 5-year Alamiya program. Hundreds and maybe thousands have graduated from the first 2 years. Now we've worked towards, alhamdulillah, having 28 students that have already graduated. From among them, we have some that are imams, some are youth directors. We have sisters who are serving as female religious directors. We have chaplains in universities, and we have, some are serving as teachers. And each person is basically, some are doing post-grad studies. We have some students right now that are at Zaytuna, and they're gone there for to further their Islamic studies. So at the end of that, they choose where they go and where they're going to head out with it. So it starts off with the broader end of the funnel that has massive appeal, to then the more narrow part where you're pushing out people who you're hoping are going to replicate it. Our goal is that if we maintain par, if we maintain what we're doing and head ahead, with consistency, in the next 10 years, we should be able to produce 150 plus imams.
MashaAllah.
And that's where we're hoping revolution comes from, because once these imams, once these individuals are placed in communities and the communities have some overlap, let's say, for example, one serving in Naperville, the other one serving in Bolingbrook, there's some overlap there. Now you're going to have change.
MashaAllah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. MashaAllah.
So if one person's in Cincinnati, the other person's in Westchester, now there's overlap. So if we have enough people on the communities strategically serving the community in different capacities, male and female, if we can get them out there, that overlap will then help bring a true change, which we're hoping to have an impact, inshallah.
Jazakallahu khairan, Mufti Sahib, for coming on, so graciously accepting the invitation. May Allah Ta'ala put barakah in the work that you're doing at Qalam and fill it with barakah and afiyah as well. MashaAllah, everything that you're doing. May Allah Ta'ala reward you and bless you, for teaching me so much, first and foremost. MashaAllah. It is truly an honor and pleasure. Jazakallah khairan.
Barakallah feek. It was a pleasure spending this time with all of you, and with you especially, Hamza. It's a pleasure. You weren't taking no for an answer. So no. Hamza doesn't take no for an answer, for all of you guys that are listening here. I never said no to him, so let me be honest.
Yeah. But
he doesn't back off.
You said yes first.
Yeah. I said yes first, then I got like yes. But he's like, no, I'm not letting go. I heard it. So, but that persistence of yours is really beautiful too. So, Jazakallah khair for having me. And for those of you that are joining us online, stay in these gatherings, be a part of these conversations, continue to benefit from these episodes and share them with your beloved ones, inshallah. And what we're trying to do is get the word out there and get people excited, and you can be a vessel for this. So, Jazakallah khair to my dear beloved friend Hamza Warsi for this, and for all of you for joining us. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.